It's July 2024, and two sisters are about to make a big decision.
We are very quiet. We would not in a million years want to make ourselves put out there for any way.
They're building up the courage to send an email.
I couldn't even sing a song if you asked me to in company.
This is Bernie.
We've thought long and hard about this.
Bernie and her younger sister Kathleen feel like they're in a battle for their big sister Elizabeth.
We had tried every avenue, everything. We appealed and appealed and appealed. We went to the DPP, they said no. We went to the Garda Commissioner, no. We went to State Solicitor's Office, no.
The email Bernie and Kathleen are planning on sending, it's to us.
This is our last resort.
And when they do send it, they'll be breaking the seal of silence their family has held for almost 50 years.
Sunday night, we were on the phone to each other and Kathleen said, I'm thinking of what to say in the email.
I said to myself, I'll send it now.
Elizabeth Plunkett was one of the victims of Ireland's first serial killers. And all these years later, Bernie and Kathleen are attempting to finally seek justice and restore some dignity for their sister.
Dear Documentary on One team, my name is Kathleen. My sister Bernadette and I are the younger sisters of Elizabeth Plunkett, who was one of the victims of JS and GE along with Mary Duffy in the summer of 1976. It's too long and detailed a story to explain properly by email. Kind regards, Bernadette Barry, Kathleen Nolan.
You got back onto me and said, I've sent the email, and I went, oh no, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then she got back onto me, you won't believe it.
I think 15, 20 minutes later I got a reply and he said, I'd be very interested to speak with you.
And that's how we first came to meet Bernie and Kathleen.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Bernie and Kathleen are in their 60s. Kathleen works in healthcare and Bernie's retired. They are warm and clearly close sisters, finishing off each other's sentences, just like me and my sisters. Something you'll hear throughout the podcast. And the other voices you might hear throughout are producers Nicoline and Liam.
Okay, one.
And one other thing I should tell you is that this story includes details of sexual violence. It could be difficult for some listeners, so please keep that in mind and take care.
Gardaí at Wicklow, supported by detectives from Dublin Castle, have intensified their search for the Dublin girl Elizabeth Plunkett, who's been missing for 10 days. Detectives joined the search after some clothing and shoes belonging to the girl were found about 2 miles from a public house outside Wicklow town.
The reason Bernie and Kathleen are finally speaking out is not just because of what happened to their sister Elizabeth, but because of what didn't happen to the two men who confessed to brutally kidnapping, raping and murdering her.
I thought all these things were taken care of. I never thought I'd see myself at 62 years of age dealing with this.
Everything they thought they knew about what happened after Elizabeth's murder, they only recently found out it's all wrong.
When somebody's murdered, the only people they have to speak for them are their family. We're being denied any sort of justice. We're Elizabeth's voice now.
I'm Roz Purcell, and from RTE Documentary on One, this is Stolen Sister. Episode 1, Elizabeth.
This is Pembroke Cottages now, where we used to live, where Elizabeth lived. There's the house there.
This little street of terraced cottages is in Ringsend, on the banks of the Liffey in Dublin City, where the river meets the sea.
You see the river wall. When we were kids, this is where we played.
Ringsend is busy today, with traffic from the Eastlink toll bridge. But back in the 1960s and 70s, when Elizabeth and her sisters were growing up here, Ringsend was a much quieter, tight-knit community, full of working families.
Very few cars, so you could kick ball and play tennis. Great summers, Katie playing here. Nobody closed their doors. You'd play in your porch, play mothers.
This is the house she left and never came back to.
Elizabeth came from a family of 10. Her mother and father had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. Elizabeth was a middle child and everyone had to fit into this 2-bedroom cottage in Ringsend.
Very simple, boys' rooms and girls' room.
Their parents slept on a pull-out bed in the living room. Eddie was the eldest boy in the family, Elizabeth's big brother, and he had to move out when the younger ones came up.
Pembroke Cottage was a small, tiny cottage. We couldn't all live there, so we all had to kind of get a move out, you know. There wasn't a Bob in Ringsend.
If you don't know any difference, you think it's quite normal, you know.
And Thomas was Elizabeth's little brother.
I was the youngest boy, and ahead of me was Elizabeth, so we were quite close. She had a big personality, you know. She could be quite bossy as well, actually, you know. To her younger brother, anyway.
The other siblings were Liam, Sean and Joan, the eldest sister and the first to get married when Elizabeth was 15.
We've lovely pictures of us all at the wedding across the road there in the church. Bernie and I are flower girls, Liz's bridesmaid. She was the chief. She was like maid of honour. Very happy times.
If you look across the Irish Sea from Ringsend on a fine day, you might just make out the northwest of England. This is where the two men who would take Elizabeth's life came from. JS and GE, as Elizabeth's sisters call them. They can't even say their names still. That's John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans. They're the men who came to Ireland in the mid-1970s and set out to murder one woman a week.
One of the most notorious crimes ever committed in these islands.
Ireland's first serial killers.
People will remember the name Shaw and Evans. It's as evocative here as Myra Hindley and Ian Brady are in the UK.
Two of the most evil, diabolical human beings that I ever came across.
As Elizabeth grew up in the safe surroundings of Ringsend, John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans racked up multiple convictions for burglary, assault, possession of heroin and attempted rape. In between prison sentences, Evans worked as a labourer and Shaw as a coal miner. They both married and had children. They actually only met each other in prison when they were serving time for robberies and assault. When Shaw was being sentenced, the judge said to him,
"This appalling sexual assault was one of the worst cases any court could be called upon to deal with. You are a persistent and dangerous criminal and a menace to the public."
All of this was a million miles from the life Elizabeth and her sisters knew in Dublin.
It was a colourful time then, the beginning of the 70s. After coming through the 60s, there was a big kind of change then for women. There was more independence, there was more work, and there was more money. So they were saying, don't stick back in the old-fashioned way like their parents. You got married, you had children, you stayed at home. This wasn't going to be a life that Elizabeth wanted.
When Elizabeth was about 16, she got a job in a local factory called Thomas de la Rue, a company that printed foreign currency.
I started to work with her in Delarue. We were in the social club there together. It was a great place to work.
Elizabeth was the woman around the house. She was the boss. 4 brothers. She would take over Saturday morning when she had a day off and clean the house from top to bottom.
If she got her mind set on something, she was going to do it. Headstrong, you'd call it. And with having brothers, she would stand up to them because my father would say, oh, it's only the girls now wash the dishes. And she'd say, there's no reason why the brothers can't wash dishes too. So that's the type of person she was.
You know that energy that age group has? Everybody's old-fashioned. If she'd argue with my dad, she'd say, that's my prerogative. And we'd be all going, prerogative? What's that? What's a prerogative, you know? So she read Cosmo and she had notions, you know.
In Eddie's house in Cork, he picks up a picture in a frame.
And we have a lovely photograph of Elizabeth. She was full of it, very confident, very athletic. So that
she was
that's
beautiful,
Elizabeth.
wasn't she?
Oh, she was. She was great. Yeah.
For everyone in the Plunkett family, their lives have a before and an after. Life before Elizabeth was murdered.
My mother would dance around the kitchen and sing. She thought she should have been a film star. We were a very united, large Dublin working class family. The bond then was unique.
And life after Elizabeth was murdered. And those lives are so vastly different.
Little did we know that all of this would come crashing down. It destroyed the peace.
In 1974, as Elizabeth turned 21, Shaw and Evans were released from prison in England. And within a short time, they'd brutally kidnapped and raped 3 victims in the Greater Manchester area.
The police hunt for 2 men, believed to have been involved in the rape of 2 women, and a 15-year-old girl, was being stepped up in Perthshire today.
Women in the area of Cheshire were warned today, don't walk alone in isolated spots. The warning came from police hunting 2 men who callously raped a 15-year-old local girl in a caravan.
At the time, there was a large manhunt, but Shaw and Evans evaded justice. They assumed false identities and came by ferry across the Irish Sea to hide out in Ireland. Once they got here, they began carrying out burglaries before getting caught and sentenced to 2 years in Dublin's Mountjoy prison. Meanwhile, back in Ringsend, at the De La Rue factory, Elizabeth made friends with a co-worker called Mella Bush.
I'm Mella Nesbitt, nee Bush. I worked with Elizabeth side by side. I think we were about 3 or 4 years working together. We just became very, very close friends. Whatever she did, I did. Whatever I did, she did. As a friend, she was the best. You could tell her any secret you have. A fantastic friend. We just did lots of things together. We went everywhere together.
Mella had a brother called Damien, who became Elizabeth's boyfriend.
They got together. I was the little gooseberry. I was always stuck between the two of them. Now, I would be maybe a couple of years behind them, or I might be sitting somewhere, and I could just hear the two of them shouting at one another that they loved one another. Damien, I love you. And Damien would say, Liz, I love you. You know, it was just, that was just the way they were.
At 23, Elizabeth really liked Damien. And it wasn't long before she introduced him to her younger sisters.
They obviously clicked with each other. He would come down to the house, call down.
My job was to make sure the brasses was polished. If Damien was calling down, she'd say, do that and I'll give you whatever. And she'd leave a few bob for me in the press, in a teacup. She was great, she'd pay you, but you'd have to do what she said. Like, you know, she was the boss.
Damien was a mechanic, working in the family garage business in Inchicore in Dublin.
He had the coolest Capri car. Like, I mean, you're not living.
He would pull up outside and my dad would say, Liz is here. And he could step in for a minute. I think he was afraid of my dad. My dad had a very, what would you call it, Katie, way about him. Like, you know, yeah, it's like, what's your intentions? Just coming here in the door. And ABBA, they were such ABBA fans. Damien had every tape of ABBA and he would put that in the car, blaring with the windows open on a sunny Sunday going off for a drive. But Damien was a really nice guy, I have to say. She was madly in love with him, and I think he felt the same about her.
Damien was into cars, and around the time he had met Elizabeth, Damien and a friend of his, Joe McCoy, had decided to get into motor rallying. So they went halves on a car together. And why I'm telling you this? Because, bizarrely, this deal would play a part in changing the course of Elizabeth's life. Damien was also saving money for a holiday. So were his sister Mella and Elizabeth. Elizabeth loved travel and the outdoor life, going camping and hiking around Ireland.
She was in Onoiga and she was in the Rangers across there on the Dodder. It was all about going places.
And Elizabeth was also beginning to explore the world beyond Ireland.
She was in Bulgaria as well, Spain a few times.
In July 1976, Elizabeth, together with her boyfriend Damien and his sister, Mella, Elizabeth's best friend, the three of them went on a holiday to Saint-Tropez. Kathleen and Bernie were so impressed by their big sister, who just seemed so glamorous.
I remember thinking, oh my God, how exotic, in the south of France. They were camping and caravanning and boating, you name it. But there's the most beautiful pictures of her.
There's the pictures.
There they are, the two of them together. Isn't that a gorgeous photograph?
They look so cool.
They were cool. They were like really, really cool. Look at them kissing. They were only 5 months together, but you know, they're the best 5 months of any relationship, aren't they?
The photos show Elizabeth lying in the grass, wearing kind of round John Lennon-style yellow-tinted glasses, looking up at the camera smiling. And in another, she's sitting cross-legged in a field of daisies, She's barefoot, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. There's also a VW Beetle and a caravan in the background. And honestly, it could be the cover of a 70s album.
She loved her style.
She loved to go up Grafton Street, and then there was the Dandelion Market, the jeans and the
remember our clogs. Anything that was out, she had it, you know.
Yeah.
And we were trying to copy her.
Elizabeth bought some clothes in France, including a navy jumper with Saint-Tropez written on the front of it. Not long after Elizabeth came back from Saint-Tropez, in early August 1976, John Shaw was released from prison in Dublin. He was immediately arrested on foot of an extradition warrant from UK police charges, which included the rape of 2 women and a 15-year-old girl in Manchester. But, and this is unbelievable, Shaw claimed he wasn't the same person named in the extradition warrant, and so the judge released him on bail as Gardaí set out to prove his identity. And 3 weeks later, the exact same thing happened to his accomplice, Jeffrey Evans. And just like that, they were both free.
Of course, during this hot spell, the government is asking people to conserve water to preserve our reservoirs.
1976 was one of the hottest summers on record in Ireland, and Elizabeth's sister Bernie still remembers the thrill of Ireland's heatwave.
Best summer we'd had for years. And every weekend was a sunny weekend. Everybody wanted to go to a beach.
Sun was still shining at the end of August, when Elizabeth made plans for the last Saturday night of the summer.
According to the weathermen, the weather's going to hold good for several more days.
I've been a friend of Damien Bush since we were in Bolton Street College in 1970.
These words are from the statement Damien's friend, Joe McCoy, gave as part of Elizabeth's murder investigation, read by an actor.
About Wednesday the 26th of August 1976, I rang Damien from work and he told me that his sister Mella had a friend with a caravan in Brittas Bay and he invited my girlfriend and myself down to the caravan for a ballad session. We arranged to meet at the house.
This was what Elizabeth had planned for that Saturday, a night away with friends to mark the end of a brilliant summer. Brittas Bay is in County Wicklow, just an hour south of Dublin City, and has 5 kilometres of soft sandy beach. And for years, it's been a spot for Dubliners to escape the city when the sun is shining. Bernie was 17, and that Saturday lives in her mind still.
Elizabeth was getting ready to go. Damien was to pick her up sometime in the afternoon. My mum and my Auntie Lily were sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea. I was just relaxing on the bed while I was throwing these few things together. So there was a wedding on up at the church. My mum and my Auntie Lily rambled up to the church. So they were standing outside the church, obviously waiting for the bride to come out. Damien had eventually come along, pulled up outside the cottage. I heard her going out the door and she said, "I'm off, I'll see you." And I said, "Bye, I'll see you then when you get back." So off she went out the door, put the bags in the boot and drove up to come out of Ringsend. You come around by the church then to leave to do a left. And my mum and Auntie Lily then said, "There's my mum," beep. They beeped the car and my mum and Auntie Lily waved her off. Have a good time. And little did my mum know that she was waving her off forever.
We can piece together everything that happened next, from statements that all of the friends later gave to Gardaí. In Damien's statement, he describes how they headed for a nearby hotel bar to meet up with all of their friends.
The 3 of us drove to Saks Hotel in Donnybrook. I drank 2 or 3 pints of Carlin and Elizabeth drank soda water and lime. We stayed in Saks till about 7 p.m. or 7:30.
As Elizabeth, Damien and their gang of friends were getting ready to drive to Brittas Bay, John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans were also on the move. On their release from prison, they'd spent the last few weeks lying low in Feathered, County Tipperary. But on that Saturday evening, they borrowed a car and drove towards Dublin, as Shaw and Evans outlined in the subsequent statements they gave to Gardaí.
The car was in Austin. Jeffrey and I left Feathered in the car on the Saturday and we drove to Dublin. We went there to collect suitcases of Jeffrey's at the railway station along the quays. We collected them at about 4 or 5 in the evening. We had a meal in the city. We decided to go to Brittas Bay, County Wicklow, and break into some caravans.
But on the way, they decided to stop off at Jack White's pub for a drink.
Somewhere outside Arklow, we went into a pub on the main road and had a few drinks.
We stopped at a pub. It's on the main road to Arklow. It's beside a signpost indicating Brittas Bay. It was around about 8 o'clock at night when we got there. I drank 2 pints of lager and John had the same.
At around the same time, Elizabeth, Damien and their friends were driving to Brittas Bay, to a pub called McDaniel's. As some of Elizabeth's friends, Annette and Eileen, would later tell Gardaí.
We arrived at McDaniel's between 9 and 9:30 p.m. It was dark when we got there. When Liz was approaching the pub door, she was wearing white jeans, a blue top with Saint-Tropez across the breast. She had navy blue sandals.
Damien described how they all settled into McDaniel's and got drinks.
We went up the steps and over to our right, and some of the girls sat down around the table. The men were standing, as were Elizabeth and Annette. The place was crowded. We were enjoying ourselves.
Elizabeth had only met one of the girls, Joe's new girlfriend, Annette, earlier that day.
At around 9:45 p.m, Damien was talking, laughing and joking with Liz. He put his arm around her and said, "Ah, you're me little pet." She just got embarrassed and smiled.
Not far up the road from McDaniel's, the two men, Shaw and Evans, finished off their drinks, as Evans explained.
It was dark when we come out. I don't know what time it was, but we were a couple of hours in the pub. We drove down to Brittas Bay.
By this stage, Shaw and Evans were on a mission. Knowing multiple rape charges and other serious offences were awaiting their extradition back to the UK, they were going to do exactly what they wanted to do while they were on the run. And a word of caution at this point, because what we will tell you about these two men's actions could be difficult to hear for some people, because their intention was to kidnap, rape and kill at least one woman a week for as long as they could get away with it. It would make them Ireland's first serial killers.
There must be something wrong with me.
When we did this, I know it was wrong, but I never thought it would finish up like it did.
Back inside McDaniel's pub, Elizabeth's boyfriend Damien was arguing with his friend Joe about that car they'd bought, as Damien later outlined to Gardaí.
I sold the car without telling Joe about it. That night in the pub he drew up the subject and said it was a bad show on my behalf to sell the car without telling him. I told him not to be annoying me, but he kept on and on about it.
Joe's girlfriend Annette was talking to Elizabeth as all of this was going on.
Joe and Damien were talking in low tones. Damien said in a higher tone of voice, "Joe, forget about it. I don't want to talk about it anymore." Liz and I stopped talking when we heard Damien raising his voice. We looked around at the two of them. I just looked at Joe's face as if to say, "What's going on?" And Liz crossed between Joe and I and faced Damien.
No one could have imagined that what happened next would set in train a sequence of events that would see Elizabeth's life being savagely taken from her.
I put my finger on her left cheek and said, "Go away, don't be annoying me." She said, "If you do that again, I'll go home." I said to her, "Go home then."
By this stage, John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans were driving around outside McDaniel's pub, and they were on the lookout.
They were hunting women. That's what they were doing, and I've admitted that.
We were talking about girls, and Jeffrey said he was going to pick up a bird and have it off with her. He said he wanted a small bird. Jeffrey were driving. We drove around the roads for a small while looking for a bird. We saw one standing at a corner. Jeffrey stopped and asked her if she wanted a lift. I got out of the car and walked up the road at the time. This girl told Jeffrey that she were waiting for somebody, and he picked me up again.
That young woman had no idea of the fate she had just escaped. Gardaí never managed to trace or speak with this woman. And tragically, her lucky escape was a sliding door moment for Elizabeth.
Over one argument, that if hadn't it happened, life would be so completely different today for our family.
This argument would change all of these friends' lives in some way. Most of all, Elizabeth's.
She said to him, "That's it, you're ruining the evening, I'm gone."
She walked off in the direction of the door, having said, "Right."
It was around 10:30 p.m. when Elizabeth Plunkett walked away. I think she was more embarrassed than anything because Damien had said it to her in front of us. I felt like following her, but on second thoughts, I decided not to in case I'd further embarrass her.
With that, Elizabeth Plunkett walked out alone into the dark night in Brittas Bay. If you were in Brittas Bay on the 28th of August 1976 and have any further information on Elizabeth Plunkett, please contact us in confidence at documentaries@rte.ie. Join us in our next episode, as just moments later, that Saturday night begins to turn into a devastating nightmare for Elizabeth Plunkett and everyone who loved her.
We stopped and picked this girl up. She said, "Are you going to Dublin?" And I said, "We weren't going to Dublin, but we could still give her a lift." She got into the front passenger seat.
Stolen Sister is narrated by me, Roz Purcell. The music is by Oscar-winning composer Stephen Warbeck and performed by the RTE Concert Orchestra. Readings in this episode were by Patrick Dunn, Kathy Hayes, Kenny McGilliforig, Jade Hill, Jessica Phelan and Cian Cleary Hand.
And sound design and orchestra recordings are by me, Ciarán Dunn.
Production assistance is by me, Shauna McGreevy.
And the series is written and produced by me, Nicoline Greer.
The executive producer is Liam O'Brien. If you've been affected by any issues raised in this episode, please visit rte.ie/helplines. Until next time, thanks for listening.